Hello, everyone. My name is Kirk Bachman, and welcome back to The Ultimate Dish. Today, we're honored to have Kevin Boehm, a James Beard Foundation award-winning restaurateur and one heck of a cool person. Kevin is one of the world's foremost hospitality visionaries with a career spanning 3 decades and over 40 restaurants opened. Growing up in Springfield, Illinois, he dreamed of opening a restaurant at just 10 years of age. That vision led him to launch restaurant ventures in the Florida Panhandle, where he opened his first six-table eatery by age 23. Today, Kevin and his partner Rob Katz helm the acclaimed Boka Restaurant Group, known for earning 13 consecutive Michelin Guide stars for their flagship Boka, and accolades such as TimeOut Chicago's Restaurateurs of the Year and Eater National's Empire Builders of the Year. They also claimed the James Beard Award for Best Restaurateur in America in 2019. Kevin has spoken at the National Restaurant Show, Miami Food and Wine, Kellogg School of Management, and Lincoln Center's Welcome Conference. He's also been named one of Chicago dining's most powerful influencers. So get ready for an insightful discussion on the evolution of dining, the power of vision, and the art of exceptional hospitality. And there he is. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. I'm good. I'm cold today.
What?
Chicago is famously cold. Sometimes I think it's a bit of an exaggeration. It's no exaggeration today. It is bitter
It,
cold.
it is chilly, right? I saw that. It's like the 1 degree factor, the 2 degree factor. And I'm a guy that's in Boulder, Colorado, and I shouldn't be complaining about this at all. But I get it. I get it. It's hey, can I just tell you from a very personal perspective, I'm beyond excited to chat today. I am so appreciative of your time. I can tell you're in beautiful Chicago. I do see blue skies behind you,
Yeah, it's
although
sunny.
although it's cold. Um and what people won't know is that I'm probably out of breath because we had to run to a new venue for better internet. But that's the art of innovation, right? But um, what a lot of people don't know, Kevin, is that we met a couple of Septembers ago at the Roots conference at the Chef's Garden. I'm diving right in, buddy. I'm diving right in.
Yeah, dive in.
I was so, can I just, I was moved just by your presence and given how busy you are, you brought, that's a very, I am seated again this past year. It's a very, very special event, and it brings some really, really beautiful people together, including Farmer Lee, my buddy. And, but I thought you brought such insightful conversation around food and sustainability.
Oh,
And
thanks.
yeah, and it really struck me. And I don't I don't work for the Chef's Garden. I work with the Chef's Garden. I love them. And I believe in what they're doing, but I'm curious, just right off the bat, what did that experience and the bigger question is experiences like that mean to you, and how do they shape our future? How do we get this narrative out to more
Yeah.
people?
Well, I want to start by saying, like, if you go back to the 22-year-old version of me, my main goal, what I wanted more than anything, was to be able to sit at the table with great people, the people who were the best at their craft. So you go to Chef's Garden and you take the bus over from the hotel, and I'm sitting next to Ruth Reichel, and then you go, and 20 minutes later, I'm embracing Farmer Lee Jones. There's two people right there who very few people in history, whether it be critical writing or regenerative farming, there's maybe two of the best of all time right there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so I'm just grateful to be in the company of those people and to be at the table. But also, I like any event where there's real conversation,
yeah,
not just
yeah.
polite conversation. There was a long time where I would go to events and sit on panels and nobody would say anything. And that's changed a bit in these last years. So when you go to an event like that, people are having real conversation and pushing each other a little bit. And this is the tough part of our world right now. We live in a very cruel world sometimes. Just check out the comments section on anything on social
Yeah.
media. And it bothers me because I think we've lost the ability to sometimes to use our collective intelligence to find an answer. Instead, it's all this black and white, where this is what I believe and this is what you believe. And because we have two different beliefs, we must hate each other. And so I love it when the restaurant business gets together because we have a lot of issues
Yeah.
and people who can just like, hey, can we just throw a bunch of ideas up against the wall and like see where the conversation leads us?
What are
So
you doing and how can it impact me? And to your point, so many of, you had the tent there where there was some formality, right? But quite honestly, the majority of the really great conversations happened outside of the tent, on the farm, in the corner, right?
yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah, really, really well said. Hey, before I go any further, I wanted to nudge and let you know that Stephanie Izard, who I met years and years and years ago before Girl and the Goat. She had
yes,
recently graduated, from a school that I was working with at the time,
yes.
and I listened to. I was driving back from Aspen a couple of weeks ago, and I listened to her podcast with Andrew Friedman, who and he was at Roots this past September, my kind
Yeah,
of partner in crime, and it was so good. If you haven't heard it yet, you probably have.
I
It's
have.
so good.
Yeah.
And I told Noel that it really raised the bar for me. I'm gonna have to like listen to that like 10 times before I get on. I already told Andrew, like, God, dude, you
Andrew's a very close friend, and obviously Steph and I have been partners for 15 years. So
isn't that something? It's
yeah.
it's uh obviously we've done our research. We're not stalking, believe me. We're fascinated, right, by your story and your history. You mentioned, I'm quoting here, you mentioned that hospitality is about making people feel seen. I've heard a lot of quotes, but I've never heard that. I've never even thought of it like that way. I think it's so powerful. It's a powerful idea in an industry that really is all about networking and connection, right? Can you share, if you don't mind, where that philosophy comes from and maybe even how it shaped your approach to building restaurants and relationships and that sort of thing?
I think just conversations with people is a microcosm of this. When you have a conversation with someone and they actually ask you questions and active listen when they're talking to you, it makes you feel seen, right? Instead of them just waiting for you to end to make their next point. Well, the restaurant business is sort of the same way. If like, I'll give you an example. If your restaurant gives somebody a free dessert at birthday for a birthday,
Hmm.
but they can tell that that's just an automatic SOP, that every time it's
Yeah.
a birthday, it's in the notes, that goes down. It doesn't really make you feel seen. It makes you think that you're part of a set of rules.
Okay. Okay.
So
Yeah.
if you can do something that shows them that you're paying attention, and it can be very, very small. And I think, open table notes, I've said for many, many years, are only as good as you feed them. And so if you have something in there that's personal and it's like, I know that, their son John is now attending Indiana. And I go up to the table and I go, how's he liking being a Hoosier? You know, I'm going to root against them when they play Illinois, but I'm glad. I hope he's happy. That's a very, very small thing because of a note I took the last time they died that makes them feel like I remembered them. Their mind doesn't automatically go to a set of rules or that I even stored it in open table. They just think I remember them from a conversation. These are the kind
Yeah.
of things that make a meal taste better and make a dining experience feel better. And it's very, very subtle. Years ago, I went into a restaurant and the hostess had a newspaper in front of her face, and she didn't hear me walk in. And I had said to my person I was with, I was like, I wanted to see how long it took. It was like a couple minutes before she put the newspaper down. I knew I was going to have a terrible meal. I
Yeah.
knew that
Yeah.
if the manager was allowing her to sit and read a newspaper at the host stand, that there was probably a whole different other aspects of that restaurant that they weren't paying attention to. So when you show somebody that you're paying attention, they think that that aspect hits all the different areas: design, cleanliness, the way we store our food, the way we order everything.
That
So,
triggered a memory for me. I grew up in, my family's restaurant business, and my father was adamant about the bathrooms. He was adamant about the bathrooms being perfect, clean, good aroma, thoughtful. We'd hang menus in there. is that's real, right? You want the bathrooms to be spotless, right? And I think it improved during the pandemic, right? Out of pure panic, but
Well, like one of the first things I ever heard was like hot food hot, cold food cold, keep your bathrooms clean.
yeah,
That was
yeah.
like the core competencies of having a decent restaurant.
Well, and to come back to what you said about being seen and just the subtle little thing about being a Hoosier, man, what the serendipitous halo effect of that, I guess, is them telling someone else and then
Mm-hmm.
them telling somebody else.
Yeah.
That's you can't pay for that sort of marketing, right? Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. I want to talk a little bit about. I'm going to try to make you blush a couple of times today, right?
Okay.
Rob Report,
Go for
50
it.
most powerful people in American dining. I mean, wow, right? Kevin, I mean, being named one of the individuals on this report in American dining, that alone is a remarkable achievement. And I'm sure you're incredibly proud. But what a testimony or a testament to your influence on the culinary landscape, on the dining landscape, right, in our country. Do you ever think about it like that? Like I have an impact. I'm making an impact on something far beyond Chicago.
There were so many years where I just buried my head and went in and walked a dining room and just did the job. And like sometimes these things would happen and they were really exciting. But there are certain things that happen and that are very impactful because when I first started out, when I would read about the James Beard Awards or even just read about Ruth when she first started New York Times, that's when I first got a subscription to the New York Times. And I would read her writing about, say, Union Pacific in New York. And it was like I was reading science fiction. It was like, I know this is for real, but I'm never going to see it. It didn't seem real to me. I was on a back deck of a little restaurant in rural Florida. So when we're on a list or something like that, I'm certainly grateful. And it still kind of seems like science fiction a little bit, like, is that real or am I really influential at this point? I mean, it's when my mom turned 50 years old. I remember saying to her, I was like, Mom, you're 50. How do you feel? And she's like, I have the same insecurities and pre-wiring that I did when I was 18 years old. I only know that I'm 50 by looking at myself in the mirror. So
What a great response. Wow.
in a lot of ways, I'm still the kid on the back deck who, a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, small town chip on his shoulder, just, with a serious imposter syndrome, trying not to get caught, and so but realistically, I look at our company now. We have so many talented people that work for our company. And fortunately, a lot of what these really talented people do, shines a bright light on the whole group, which also shines a light on me. So I'm fortunate that some really smart people also make me look very good. So
I so love how you sort of deflect to your team, super humble. So I'm not surprised. I appreciate it. And let's go back a little further to those early ambitions and the entrepreneurial beginnings. Ambition is a really powerful word, right? And it's important for people to understand that the work that goes into that is not formulated overnight, right? So, and tell me if I'm wrong, stop me, but your desire to be incredibly successful, ran in your DNA, if you will. So, before we get into Boka, I'd love to hear a little bit more, and our listeners would love to hear a little bit more about the upbringing, to get the full picture. Take us back to 1982, your first job of selling tomatoes in your driveway and the dream that you told your mom about opening a restaurant.
yeah,
Where'd this all come from? Yeah.
I have a book coming out. And
Uh-oh. I
I
love
had
it.
it comes out on Abrams. It's called The Bottomless Cup. Comes out in the fall. I had a really crazy childhood, and I'm not going to tell all my secrets here because I've never told them. I'm telling them in the book for the first time. But I will say that like I had a tough childhood, and my mom was one of 14 kids who grew up on a farm, and my mom did not suffer fools and lazy people gladly. She was tough in a really great way. She was a hard worker. She was farm labor at age 6, and she was just like, we didn't have very much money, and she's like, well, kid, you want to make some scratch, you better figure it out. And we had a garden plot at Sangamon State University, my mom did, that they were giving to people. And I was like, can I have a patch of this to grow my own stuff? And I grew tomatoes and ended up selling them. So starting at about age 12, I had two paper routes. I sold tomatoes. As soon as I was able to, took a job at Hardee's shaving roast beef. I always had like 3, 4, 5 jobs going on at the same time. And that's kind of where I got my early self-confidence from, was like, how did I perform in a work setting? Most people think that happiness in life is tied to pleasure, but it rarely is. A lot of times it's how we feel about ourselves. And a lot of times that's doing a job and a job well done, right? And so I kind of figured out that me working and being successful in a work environment, because I had a lot of other problems, was what kind of made me happy. And so coming out of that, and I spent, a few semesters at the University of Illinois, but I knew I wanted to open up my own restaurant. And it seemed like there was a lot of hurry up and wait that was going to be going on. Oh, I got to get education and I got to interview and I got to work my way up. And I was like, no. And I woke up one day and I dropped out of college, ill-advised, didn't really tell anybody, didn't really tell my parents. And I just dropped off and I dropped out and drove to Florida. And it went very poorly. I couldn't get a job at a restaurant. I'm working in an amusement park. I ended up living in my Jeep and was homeless. And so it started out terrible. But eventually I wrote this beautiful piece of fiction that was my first resume, with a bunch of restaurants that had mysteriously gone out of business that they couldn't call for a reference. And so I talked my way into a captain's job at a fine dining restaurant in 1991 or 1992, 1991, I think. And that's where it all started. And I knew within 2 weeks, I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
I want to come back to a couple more influences, but before that, I read in an interview with Esquire, you said, and I quote, "For me, the restaurant business saved my life. I often found myself keeping the peace in my own home growing up, and it was a training ground for hospitality." So I'm just curious, coming back to your entrepreneurial spirit and the motivation from your mom and such, were there any other influences? Was it a movie? Was it in your DNA? Was it an uncle? You know, Restaurant business, 12 years old, tomatoes, where's it come from?
Okay, it's just kind of funny. So because we didn't have very much money, the landscape of television at the time had a lot of wealthy people in nighttime serials, most notably Dallas and Dynasty. So I remember Alexis Carrington having caviar and getting so giddy about it. And I'm like, what is it about this caviar that makes her so crazy? And then I remember on Fantasy Island, Mr. Work, somebody having him describing oysters as an aphrodisiac. And I'm like, well, I don't know what that means, but supposedly it does something to like possess these people's bodies or whatever. Like, I just was like fascinated by these tales of, either these proteins or gifts from the sea that that I didn't know about, that seemed so foreign to me. And
Yeah,
so there was a
yeah.
fascination for me, with things I didn't normally see in my own life, including food. So here I was living in a house where we never entertained. There was nobody who ever came over. And we drank powdered milk. If we did go out to eat, it was Arby's or McDonald's. And so I had this vision of a different world. And in that world, I entertained and threw parties and ate interesting food. And so some of that was the early foundation for me wanting to do this. But I think the biggest thing was I wanted to throw a party every night and have a bunch of people come and
I
have a really good time. And they would make a huge mess and we'd clean it up and then we'd do it again the next day. I was like, that okay, sign me up for that.
That's DNA. I can remember being, pretty young and thinking I was going to play center field for the Chicago Cubs. That didn't pan out, right? But it was the same
Me
thing.
too.
Right?
I
I mean,
seriously, that's the other thing I want. I describe it as, when I was young, I loved a lot of things that didn't love me back,
yeah,
including
yeah.
baseball. And I
Yeah.
was like, well, I don't have the bat speed and I can only throw like 68 miles an hour. So it's never going to happen.
But we loved it, right? We loved it,
Loved
and thank God we had some DNA, for other avenues. I've got all these quotes, right? And all these facts, and it's all kind of coming together for me. So you start your first restaurant in 93,
Yeah.
wherever the motivation came from. And but here's you open and sold four restaurants by the age of 30. Most people, let's just say almost no one accomplishes that. And so and again, so many people will listen to this and they're like, if he can do it, I can do it. So I don't ever want to discount the amount of heartbreak and work and sleepless nights and that goes into this. But how do you navigate something like that at such an early age, and then go on to do the amazing things that you've done? It's remarkable, to
Thanks.
be
I was flipping
perfectly honest.
houses. I was flipping houses basically. So
Yeah.
uh, like the six table on the back deck, I was never going to make a lot of money in that restaurant. I was paying myself $1,000 a month. Now my lucky break there was Seaside, Florida was on the doorstep of becoming a very famous small town. They filmed the Truman Show there. Time Magazine did a huge article on it. Architects were studying new urbanism and the way they planned that little community. And somebody wanted my building and bought me out. And so I took that money up the street. There still wasn't a lot of commercial property. I did a wine bar, sushi bar, rock and roll bar. And some guys from New Orleans were obsessed with my bar and wanted to buy it from me. And I was like, okay. And so I took that, signed a non compete, went to my hometown of Springfield, Illinois, opened up a restaurant. And within like 4 or 5 weeks, we were the busiest restaurant in Springfield. No independent restaurant at that point, I think in Springfield, was on a wait every single night. We were on a wait 7 days a week. People didn't even know what to do with it. They understood waiting at Olive Garden, but they didn't understand why they were waiting at this kid's restaurant called Indigo. And so I was in the right place at the right time and some luck and a lot of hard work. I mean, I worked 7 days a week. I worked every service. And so good things just kept happening. And to me, the way I looked at it is like, eventually I got to get to Chicago, San Francisco, New York, one of those three cities. Those were the three main restaurant cities at the time. And I was like, in order for me to get there, what do I need? I need capital and I need expertise and I need my passion to stay intact. Was the three things. The passion was going to be no problem. I was hell bent and obsessed. The capital was going to be hard. The education was constant.
Yeah.
I made up 15 cards that were all the different aspects of what I thought the perfect manager was. And I took an old bicycle deck of cards and I took the outside of it and I turned the card into whatever the aspect was of a manager. It might be touching a table. It might be financial acumen. It might be cocktail knowledge. It might be food knowledge, whatever. And so the idea for the early going was like a full deck for me was 15 cards. And at that point, I figured I had three of them. And so I was
Wow.
issuing myself a card. And then I later on used those cards as the way I would hire managers. When I hired them, I would assess them for 2 weeks and I would give them the amount of cards I think they'd mastered. And as they mastered another card, I'd give it to them until they had a full deck.
That's a whole business right there. We'll talk offline,
Okay.
the full deck by Kevin, right?
The full deck. I haven't done it in a long time. I still have one of the decks somewhere, but I haven't done that since the late 90s. But
I,
yeah, so for me, that was the idea is like, how do I get to Chicago?
yeah.
Um, and so to quote Simon Sinek, it's an infinite game. There's no winning or losing at it. You just try to get a little bit better every single day. And for the most part, I did that.
I'm a huge college sports anything fan. I went to the University of Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, probably, I don't know, 125,000 people. Boulder, Colorado, 125,000 people. How many people were in Springfield? I'm just curious how a college town was able to support you.
Springfield, Illinois is 140,000 people, city proper, about 400,000 that in surrounding areas.
Okay, so yeah, much more.
At the
And
time was the second biggest city in Illinois.
okay.
It's now, I think Naperville's two, Peoria's three, and Springfield's four. But
Yeah, Naperville is absolutely huge. You know, I was listening to, I just want to get your opinion on this. It just popped back into my head. I was listening to Bobby Bones, the Bobby Bones show, you know,
Mhm.
out of Nashville this morning on the way into work. And they were talking about the restaurant industry. And it was a really interesting thing. Done all these studies that they were trying to suggest that if the server, it was kind of bugging me a little bit because they were calling them waiters, but
Yes.
between you and me, it was the server that if the server was slightly overweight, that the customer was going to order more food, and they had a. I wanted to call in and say you guys have lost your minds. You've absolutely lost your minds, and it's yeah, and then the reason I bring it up is because I have such a. It's just like a flight attendant or a server. I mean, I I have such a respect for this industry, right? That going back to what we said earlier, it's about connections, about making people feel seen. I wasn't going anywhere there. I just wanted to mention it. It just popped into my head. I couldn't believe how ignorant, and even Bobby Bones, who I love, right? Usually,
Yes.
I mean, completely missed the boat here, right? And
I've spent a good part of I spent a good part of the pandemic as I was part of the Independent Restaurant Coalition, and
it,
we were on the phone constantly with, senators and lobbyists and chiefs of staff and reps. And I felt like I constantly had to explain the restaurant business to them. There's
oh,
such a lack
yeah,
of understanding across the board, of what we did for a living. And, I had a stock line that I used all the time, which was like, I remember one of the senators, a prominent one, said to me, they go, well, Kevin, I don't understand. If you get the green light tomorrow, don't you just go in and turn the lights on and you guys are open that night? And I'm like, I go, Senator, we're not a hardware store. I don't
yeah,
I don't have power saws on the shelf. That demoglaze that you had in your steak last night's gonna take a little while. I got to
yeah,
go in there, open everything up, clean the kitchen, reorder all the food, prep for a few days. We got to retrain the staff. I'm like, and so, yeah, I constantly hear people writing about restaurants that don't understand restaurants, and even people that profess to be in the business that just don't really get it.
yeah.
And so, yeah, it makes me crazy, but
We're not a hardware store. I absolutely love that. I absolutely love it. My father's a master pastry chef by German standards, and he's still alive today. And I just remember my upbringing, and education was really important to him because he didn't have one. I was going to go to school, but he really focused a lot on, when we opened the restaurant every day, what are you going to do if? What are you going to do if you run out of ice? What are you going to do if there's a power outage? And I mean, people don't often give this industry enough credit for how much critical thinking is really involved to try to make every experience for every guest spectacular, right?
one of my favorite stories. My buddy was in a play on Broadway called Joe Fearless, and in the play, the court was it was a basketball court was the
Uh-huh.
stage, and then a man's small apartment who had supposedly bet a lot of money on the game. But the game was real; it was a real full court, and so they were
Okay.
like, when my buddy went out there, he was in the play. He was like shooting jumpers and choreographed dunks and stuff like that. And while they were warming up, he noticed that Philip Seymour Hoffman sat in the front row. And so at the end of the play, my friend gets a 12-foot jump shot. He makes it. They win the game. The guy in the apartment goes crazy. It's the end of the play. My buddy goes back. He changes clothes. He goes out the side door. And Philip Seymour Hoffman's leaned up against a pole and he goes, what happens if you miss it? And Michael goes, it's a different ending. And he goes,
Is
what's the other ending? And he goes, you got to come on a night when I
when we
miss.
miss. Yeah.
And he goes, and they had written different endings. And when he told me that story, I was like, you're describing my whole life.
Yes.
We write multiple endings. We try to think up all the possible situations. We're like, what happens if the woman at table 7 catches her hair on fire in the candle? Which I've seen. What are we gonna do?
Yeah.
She might have the greatest meal of her life. She might catch her hair on fire. Let's know what we're gonna do in both instances. So we're script writers, you know. It's a little bit of improv, and it's a little bit sometimes like a Tarantino script where you don't want to change a word. Like when this happens, this is exactly what you do.
I
You know?
just love that story so much. Is that show still on Broadway
No,
today?
this is a long time ago.
Freaking brilliant.
Obviously, the late
Wow.
Philip Seymour Hoffman. This is
Yeah.
an actor friend of mine named Michael Ealy, who's a great actor. I think this is like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
he wrote that.
What a brilliant concept. And
Yeah.
well, let's talk about building Boka Group, right? 23 concepts in the portfolio, namesake Boka, um, and many stars, right, that have come to Stephanie, we mentioned earlier, Lee, who I think went to Madison Park, 11 Madison
Well,
Park.
Lee was at El Bulli in Spain, and then when it was the number one restaurant in the world, then he went to 11 Madison Park, was the number two beside Daniel Hume there. If you look at that 11 Madison Park beautiful cookbook, all that was plated by Lee. That's
Oh
where
my
I met
gosh.
Lee. I actually met Lee at EMP when I was dining there. And then he reached out to us later, asking if we were interested in him joining the group.
Wow.
But like, yeah, so I mean, from over the years, I mean, at one point we had three Food and Wine's best new chefs under one umbrella when we were partners with Paul Verant and Giuseppe Tintori in '08 and Stephanie in 12. Paul was in 7. Um, and now, Gene Cotto, who's been nominated for a Beard Award, is our chef at Momotaro and at Toko. Chris Pandel, who's won John Bonchet Awards with us. Obviously, Stephanie Lee, Michael Solomonov, who's won the James Beard for Best Chef in America, and he's won for Best Restaurant in America that we're partners with in New York. So yeah, some really amazing chef talents that I get to hang with on a daily basis. It's pretty awesome.
I just love it. Can you take us back to the early days when your partnership formed with Robert and what the vision was and also maybe Kevin how that has transformed over the years and maybe even how your role has changed a little bit as time has gone on?
People joke that when Rob and I first became partners and Boca first opened, that I would walk in and I would turn the lights up and the music down, and he would turn the lights down and the music up. That said a lot about who we were in the beginning. I was a little more fine dining. I was a little more country, and he was a little more rock and roll. And we've kind of found a happy medium with each other. But in the beginning, I think that there were more stark differences than there are now. I think he was like more back row business. I was more micro business. I was more the guy on the floor. Even though he was on the floor too. I mean, it all bleeds into each other now after 23 years together. We agree 97% of the time. That's why the partnerships worked.
Are there different endings when you don't agree?
When we don't agree, well, the rule always was nobody draws a line in the sand. If you
Uh,
disagree, you need to make a compelling argument to the other person. And the other people need to show grace every once in a while. If the other one's super passionate about something, we let them have it and we don't hold it over them if it doesn't work out. And
yeah.
so
Yeah.
we go with our instincts a lot. Him and I, we're very good friends, which certainly helps. We've really only had one or two fights in like 23 years. It's pretty remarkable.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we don't take that for granted. We're grateful for it. But yeah, it's different today because we're 3,000 employees and in several different states, and the work is different. I walked a dining room 6 days a week for about 24 years. I worked like 9 a.m. to midnight, 6 days a week for like 24 years. It's a little different now. After back surgery and all that stuff, I have to pick my spots more. I work earlier. We're a big company to run. I travel more. I don't walk dining rooms quite as much anymore, but at openings, certainly I'm there all the time. When we opened Laser Wolf in New York, I worked 30 straight services in a row.
Wow.
But it's, you know, um, when you get this big, you really have to decide where is the most important place for me to be tonight.
I
What
think
what needs me the most, and in some cases, what needs me the most is my kids at a basketball game, you know. And so I have a little more balance in my life now, thank God. Still work really hard. but I've got more balance and I can
My wife,
prioritize.
my wife Gretchen, who adores everything you guys do, by the way. We met in Chicago, and she's gonna love that you just said that. What matters most, me and for that reason, because the Oregon Ducks were in the Rose Bowl, I dropped everything I was doing and I was at that Rose Bowl, even though it didn't end the way we wanted it to. But I
Well,
would never,
as well you should have been.
yeah,
You have to pick those spots and like where should I be tonight? There's a great line and at the end of Against the Wind with Bob Seger, and he says, my life now is what to leave in and what to leave out. And I think he was talking about more about, editing and songwriting and editing in life, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And like I make some really smart moves these days, like even the way that I schedule my meetings. I'm very intentional and very deliberate about the way I do everything so I can buy little pockets of time back that I need so I can keep mentally strong because that's that's been a big part of my journey. It's a big part of the book, which is I was kind of a troubled kid of that um who threw all of his insanity at ambition. And
I'm gonna
that works for a while, but then it can combust. And it did during the pandemic. So
I can't believe how many notes I have here, Kevin, talking to you. So many nuggets that I love Bob Seger, by the way. I'm going to come back to Boca in just a moment because I want to talk about maintaining status quo while inventing for the future. But when you brought up Bob Seger, sometimes I bring this up on the show, sometimes I don't. Almost anyone that I talk to in the business is either really into music or they're into motorcycles or both, right? And so which is it for you? I'm thinking maybe music is a big part of
it's
your life.
music. Music's a huge part of my life. I'm just looking right now inside my house, and there's a painting of Joni Mitchell on the wall. There's a picture of John Coltrane on the wall, and there's a picture of Buckingham Nicks on my wall. So and a guitar in the corner. Yeah, music's been a big part of my life, my whole life. I did have a restaurant in Nashville at one point. I did live music for a long time. We just actually I have a private club here called Beyond, the foundation of his wellness, but we're just starting to do big name shows there. We just had Sarah McLaughlin play there a couple of weeks ago
Oh my goodness.
for 100 people, which is
Wow.
amazing. And so, yeah, I've been very blessed to be in some fun musical rooms in my life.
I have this like constant chill, running through me. When you walk into our home, it was a gift from my wife. I'm a little older than you, buddy.
You
I
sure
have the
about that?
I I have the lyrics to Rapper's Delight framed up on
Ah,
the
there you
wall,
go.
and it's a conversation starter.
Yeah.
People
Wait,
love
what
it.
year were you born?
62.
Okay, you're a little bit older.
Yeah.
God bless you. You look
I
great.
love you more and more all the time. I love
You
you
look
more
great.
and more all the time. Bobby Stuckey, right? You worked
Sure.
a little bit with him
Absolutely.
during the pandemic and
We
such,
worked a
but
lot. We worked a lot together during the pandemic.
yeah,
We were actually, I'm going to say that we were on at least 500 Zooms together
isn't that something, right?
during the pandemic.
He worked, you guys both, and it's so appreciated. Works so hard, particularly for us here in Boulder. But I wanted to bring him up because he has a super sexy, cool place in Denver called Sunday Vinyl, and
I
he's
know it well.
it just I was telling Curtis Duffy that this was a year ago. Curtis was coming. I think he was coming to Red Rocks to see Nine Inch Nails for a couple of shows, and I said you got to stop in Denver and see Sunday Vinyl. He absolutely loved it. Just loved it. But
I also have a Macintosh sound system and a listening room in my private club. So Bobby and I have gone back and forth
I
about.
love it. I just love it. He's so good to us too. We one of our classrooms is named after Frasca.
Oh, I love
It's
that.
super cool. The Frasca Learning Lab. Yeah, yeah.
We at the Boca 20th anniversary, we had this idea that we wanted to have the best of the best working that night in the front of the house and the back of the house. They do in the back of the house a lot of times where chefs, guest chef. But I was like, Bobby, would you come in and actually
Oh my
work the
gosh.
floor as a som? He's like, sure. And then I was like, then I called Will Guidera, who's one of my best friends. And I'm like, Will, you want to work the front door? He's like, absolutely. And then I was like, Ivy Mix, you want to bartend that night? And she's like, yeah. And then Donnie Medea was running food. And I was working all those positions with him. It was amazing.
Think about the work that went into develop those because they're telling those same stories about Kevin being, it's so fun to watch, right? 20 years for Frosca this year, 20 years for you guys, we do some things with Kristen Kish now. And
Yeah,
so she
she's
comes to
great.
town now and again. I mean, just quick Bobby story. We have a film studio in Chicago. So the next time I'm there, if you have 5 minutes, I'm going to show it to you. It's where
Yeah,
we do all of our online cooking content and stuff. It's in
yeah.
River North, right on Orleans Street. And
I
so
live
we
on I live in Orleans and Huron. That's where I am right now.
oh, okay. So I know
I'm right.
exactly.
Mr. Beef is right
No
there. I'm right
way.
next to
Oh
I
my
live right
gosh.
next door to Mr. Beef. So
I love it. So yeah, you're literally you could throw a pebble over to the studio. It's called Studio E, and we did this. Last year around this time, we did this investors dinner, very intimate, maybe 12 people, and so I had everything. I flew chefs in to cook the food and all this, and I was like, I need wine. I need wine. What am I going to do? And so I go home and
Bobby.
I'm stressing with my wife, and I'm like, what do I do? She goes, call Bobby. I mean, just call Bobby. So I
Yes.
call Bobby, who calls somebody who's repping Scarpetta in Chicago, and this amazing human being showed up and poured all the wine, talked about all the wine, and very successful event. It's all about relationships. I'm
Amazing.
I I'm getting way off track here. I'm gonna
Let me
come.
know when I can come to the school. I'll come anytime and talk, man.
Oh my God, I would love that. I would young our online population is a little bit older, career changers, things like that. But
Yeah.
our ground campuses, Boulder and Austin, very young, 24 years and younger,
Love it.
and they hang on every word. The fact that we have young people today that want to do this is, fascinating to me.
My favorite people are the people that are, that have got the bug and have
Yeah,
the fever and are so excited about it because it's contagious behavior. I feed off of it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I love young people who've got the bug and are ready to rock. What's really funny is that I know there were some critics in the early going that were like, "Oh, the bear is bad for this business," and blah blah blah. It's actually been the opposite from where I stand. I've had so many people who watch that show and have been inspired to be in the restaurant business because of it.
right, right. It's so funny that you say it's right down the street there. And I ran Le Cordon Bleu right down the street there for many, many years, and we lived there. I mean, we lived there. Season 4, episode 2, I think it was Forks, right, of the Bear, where the cousin, learned the
Yeah,
importance
that's
of
a season two.
season two. Season
Yeah, yeah,
two, yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. It sort of changed my life. And you mentioned Will. It's standard equipment for every employee here in Boulder is unreasonable hospitality. It's got to be on their shelf, right? It's hard to explain, right? It's hard to
yes.
explain. You have to live it.
Will
Kevin,
and I are
what's that?
Will and I are exceptionally close friends.
Yeah, you said that, and I just absolutely.
We talk every week.
Isn't that something? I just love hearing about those kinds of relationships and those kind of bonds. Along those lines, Kevin, I was going to ask you. You've sort of touched on it, but it's one thing to manage your portfolio. With Robert, I mean, it's a lot. How do you arrange your calendar to know that you have time set aside to think about what the future looks like what's next? How do you even think about it?
It's so interesting. I don't arrange my calendar specifically. I don't intentionally put in there or spend these 2 hours to think about what's next, but I do give myself space. And
Okay.
so that I didn't used to. You just would fill up the calendar until it was full. Um, I give myself 2 hour windows every single day in order to either return emails or if I'm having a rough day, go take a yoga class or whatever. So the way I stack meetings now is a lot of times I have a 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and a 12, and maybe some half-hour meetings in there. And then I keep 12 to 2 open for myself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then I'll book a 2, 3, 4, and 5. Or that's a lot of times what the schedule looks like is anywhere from 8 to 12 meetings in a day. And but I give myself these little 2-hour windows, and that way if I need some wellness, or if I need to think about something, or if I need to brainstorm, or if I want to be creative. Also, an airplane,
Yeah.
I love being on a long flight. It allows me just to like think and be creative. And I love, one of the dangers of social media is like when somebody does something good and unique, then 18 different people do the same idea. It's like TV used to be. Beverly Hills 902 would come out, and then you'd see The Heights, and then there'd be 11 other, TV shows that were just like it, but not as good. And same thing with the restaurant business. And so having truly creative ideas now, like, throughout the years, we've had some weird ones that didn't work and ones that don't. But we just talked about this the other day. Like we still need to be weird. We still need to, like, even if we poke holes in the idea, let's still be weird sometimes and come up with things that are. When we opened Boka, we actually had a cell phone booth inside the restaurant. And it said on the menu, if you're going to use your cell phone, please use the cell phone booth. And it was in the foyer, and you went in, and it had this really great reception. It sounded great in the room, and it was all padded. Um, and it didn't really work as a cell phone booth. People went in there all the time. A lot of times they'd sit across from each other, but we got a ton of press for it. So it was
That is
worth it.
that's I can't believe I've never heard that before. That should be on
I was
television.
on Today. I was on the Today Show. I was on Good Morning America, and being great press. It was more better press than it was functional. We did a wine list back then that for every grape varietal, there was a female winemaker and a male winemaker. So
So thoughtful. Yeah.
if we were having to replace Cabernet from Costa Rica, we might have to find a female winemaker that's making it. It was very difficult list to maintain and look at, but it made things interesting for people. And so whenever we're doing a concept, we'll look at, here's the core competencies of what it needs to be a steakhouse, and here's all the ways we can bend it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So having those moments to be creative and just think about weird ideas, and then send a text to everybody and be like, hey, what if we had an on deck circle for the next table that's coming up? And what if there was a kitchen person behind it, and we actually did an amuse at the on deck circle? And it was like a half circle, and it had 6 spots. And right before you got sat, you went there, and you got the little amuse course, and there was a little welcome drink, and then you went to your table. And then everybody starts to poke holes. You're like, well, what if we get backed up? Or what if we got to see 2 tables at once? Or how does that person get tipped out? And
What if,
so
what if,
that's
what if? Yeah. Yeah.
that's it's all the what ifs.
But that's unreasonable hospitality. Before I come back to Will and that whole concept of the art and science of hospitality, I have to say, not this past Christmas, but last year, the family and I all came to Chicago to see the Rockettes and all that. And well, maybe we're in New York. That's where the Rockettes were. We were in New
Yeah.
York, and I have a 14. I have 4 kids, and my son's 14, and he saw a payphone in this like hallway at the bottom of this giant, convention center.
Yes.
He had never seen a payphone, and of course it became
Funny.
an Instagram moment and all of that.
Yes.
But I'm going to put a cell phone booth into the school. I absolutely freaking love it.
There you go.
But let me come back to hospitality real quick, and I'm remaining cognizant of your time. I know you gotta get out of town, but you've mentioned in the past that hospitality is not always a two-way street. One of your mantras is be nice, be calm, get cold drinks in their hand and hot food on the table, quote unquote. I love how intentional that is, Kevin. There's nothing to be questioned there, right? Be nice, be calm, get cold drinks in their hand, hot food on the table. For
It's going to solve
student,
99% of the issues that you have inside of a restaurant.
right? right?
People come in because
100%.
people come in cranky, or they have high expectations, or they're hungry, or they want something right away, or they're nervous. All of those things are usually solved by getting something in front of them. Part of the reason Laser Wolf is such a brilliant concept is because immediately you get salatine and warm pita, and that comes out very, very quickly, and it's conversational, and it gets some food in people's bellies right away. People are happy instantly. And
Yeah, yeah.
so,
Because there's anxiety sometimes coming into a restaurant, wondering if you're going to get a table. I don't want to sit over there. I absolutely love it. So, Kevin, for students and others that will listen to this podcast, and again, I come back to it doesn't happen overnight, but for those who are passionate enough to want to become hospitality professionals, in just a couple of moments or less, how should they prepare? What do you need to think about on a day-to-day basis to be somewhat successful or at least satisfied with this industry? Tough
okay, so
question.
I'm going to start here. First of all, you have to decide who you want to be, because there's a whole bunch of different archetypes and people and jobs that you can be within the restaurant business. So a lot of times when I'm talking to a chef, I'm like, whose career would you like to emulate? Tells me a lot about who that person is.
Yeah, yeah.
Are they a real kitchen chef? Are they somebody who wants to be the tough guy chef? Are they interested in being a TV chef? So there's a whole bunch of variables there, but uh, we'll take it more broadly. I'd say if you want to be great, if you truly want to be considered great by people, you have to have a foundational knowledge of everything. So if somebody came to me and they go, I want to be in the restaurant business and I don't know anything about it, I go, I'm going to give you 12 jobs in 12 months and try to get as good as you can at all of them. Month one, you're going to expedite. You're going to expedite with a really tough executive chef. You're going to learn how to expedite. It's going to teach you a lot of stuff. You visually are going to be able to see the food. You're going to see how the line works. You're going to be able to call out an order. You're going to see how timing works from the kitchen to the front of the house. And then I'd go immediately from expediting to a front door. And I'd say nothing controls the economy of a restaurant more than the front door does. If you are aggressive at the front door, you can make $1 million more in sales every single year. If you sit back and don't let in and are worried that everything be exactly perfect all the time, everybody gets sad, there's never a table not ready, I go, you're going to cost yourself a lot of money that a little hospitality could have taken care of. And you're going to learn how to deal with people, talk to people, and you're going to have to manage other people that are up here. Then I would have them serve. They'd have to learn about food. They'd have to learn about wine, and they'd have to learn how to talk about both of those things. And they'd see the timing of the restaurant from the other side. Then I'd have them go work in the accounting office. So they understood that there's a financial aspect to this thing, that if we can't make this thing pencil, you can't continue doing the art.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so then I'd have them do an opening, because an opening is just pure chaos. So they would understand what a critical path was and how you create a culture, and how in each restaurant it's different and you can't blueprint it. And so that's it to me, is like, it's really hard to manage people or be successful if you don't know all the little intricacies. If you don't know how to build a slot system on open table, or a flex system rather, if you don't know how to map that out and book it and how it works, you're ultimately going to cost yourself money if you can't manipulate that system. And so I'm constantly telling people in my company, become an expert at all these things. It's the only way if you want to be a great operator someday and really make money, because it's really freaking hard to make money in this business.
Do you have this written anywhere? Like the front door controls the economy of a restaurant. I mean,
It's in my book.
I can't wait until the book comes out. I can't wait. The Bottomless Cup, Abrams Press, right? Is that what you
Yes.
said? Yeah, yeah. And it comes out in the fall, right?
Yeah.
You said, Kevin, once that scratch most restaurants and you'll reveal an addict. What does that mean?
Scratch most restaurateurs and you'll reveal an addict. A lot of us have taken a circuitous route to get to the restaurant business, but like, what I found out is that people who've had real trauma in their life are pretty good at the restaurant business.
Yeah,
And
they're
so
fighters. Yeah.
you know, when I got in the restaurant business, I wasn't emotionally affected by a 20 plate pickup or getting triple sat. It was just like, okay. And so there's a lot of people in the restaurant business I've met over the years that have addictive personalities. They especially the people that I grew up with in this business, they loved this idea of kind of nosediving the plane just to pull it back up again at the last moment. We would run so close to it going off the rails, but it never would. And then we
Yeah.
get done and we'd be like, well, that was worth it.
Right?
It was this adrenaline rush.
The
I was
rush. Yeah.
I was an adrenaline junkie. I was lucky enough to be in a small part in the Bear in the season finale, and that was actually my line. I said I've been an adrenaline junkie my whole
I
life,
remember. I
and
remember.
I
Yeah.
have been. I'm not as much anymore, but that's what I found with most of these people, that like they have an addictive personality. It works within the restaurant business, and a lot of restaurateurs get addicted to these openings. And that was for me. I was constantly trying to build manic moments. So I would get one restaurant done. I'd be like, okay, how do I feel that again? Give me that. Give me that feeling again. I loved that rush. Let's go. And I'm one of many.
I was I think right after that last part of the Bear, they kind of did it in two sections, sort of.
Yeah.
And I was in a hotel in downtown Chicago, and I was just returning from breakfast or something, and I looked over to the fireplace, and Jamie Lee Curtis was sitting there, and I'm like, "What do I do? What do I do?" So of course, I went right over to her. Can I just tell you, she was amazing. She
I
was
hear that. Yeah.
just amazing. And she was by herself, no drama, waiting on an Uber. She couldn't tell me. Of course, me, I'm like, Freaky Friday. I loved Freaky Friday. I loved
Yeah.
Freaky Friday. She's like, what about the bear? What about the bear?
I've had a lot of amazing celebrity moments in my life. Probably my favorite, and also because where I was, and I was in New York, I was at Gotham, and sitting right behind me, my favorite comedy of all time, without question, is Tootsie. And Jessica Lange is sitting right behind me,
Oh my
and not
gosh.
somebody that you would see out a lot. And she was married to Sam Shepard. She's royalty. I mean, she's an amazing
Yeah.
Academy Award winner. And so we were up on the little platform that there's only two tables at Gotham, us and Jessica's table. And at the end of the meal, I was like, ladies, I'm so
I,
sorry to bother you, but Miss Lang, I just want to say to you, I think you're magical. And her friend goes, you nailed it. She is magical. And she goes, aren't you just lovely? And so as I was leaving, I turned around off the platform to look back at her, and she went and blew
oh
me a
my gosh.
kiss. And I was
Oh
like,
my gosh.
it was like from a movie or something. I was
Life
like,
is
oh my
good.
God.
Life is good.
It couldn't have, the whole dialogue couldn't have got better. I got in, I got out, I was efficient. She blew me a kiss. It was pure
Done.
magic.
Memory.
That's my favorite non-being inside my own restaurant experience with
And
a
sharing with us. Well, I'm having a celebrity moment right now. I want you to know. You don't have to blow me a kiss, but I'm so appreciative, and I want to be
it's
cognizant
very fun.
of your time. But I can't let you go until I ask one more fun question. The name of the
Yeah.
show is The Ultimate Dish, and in all your travels and all your restaurant openings and all your experiences, Kevin, what is the ultimate dish?
Oh my gosh, what's the best dish I've ever had in my entire
Well,
life?
it could be a memory, right? It could be a
Oh,
specific dish. Yeah, yeah,
man, oh man. I have so many. I mean, I'm a believer in the emotional moments that can happen within a meal,
yeah.
really pushes it over the top. At the end of the day, who was with you? Who did you encounter? I'll actually tell you a night of service that's really important to me. Um, uh, I when we opened Laser Wolf, um, I looked on the books that night, and it was actually Amanda Clute was at a table, who was the national editor of Eater at the time. Um, Kate Crater was in the dining room, who was the food editor of Bloomberg, used to be the editor of Food and Wine. Dana Cohen was in the crowd, editor of
Wow.
One.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Otto Lange was having dinner, and Ruth
Wow.
Reichel was having dinner. Now, Ruth, I had never met before at that point. And when I first started my very first restaurant, I had subscribed to the New York Times because it made me feel really cool. And I would read her reviews. And I have a review of hers that's framed in my office wall because she had written about a restaurant. And then I had gone to New York and dined at that restaurant. So I got to match up her experience with mine. And it was like an incredible moment for a very young restaurateur. And so I went up to her and I go, Miss Reichel, you don't know me, but my name's Kevin and I'm one of the owners here. And I want to tell you a story. I go, my favorite review of all time, I actually have it framed and it's yours and it's on the wall of my office. She goes, what review? And I go, Union Pacific. And she goes, the woman next to me is moaning. That's the first line of the review. She knew it instantly.
Oh my gosh.
And I go, that's it. She goes, why do you have that up there? I go, for several reasons. I thought the review was funny. I thought it was well written. I thought it was amazing. And then I dined at the restaurant. It speaks to who I was a long, long time ago. And when I look at it, it makes me feel very innocent in this business again. It's an honor to meet you. I go, when I would read about you writing about restaurants, it inspired me. It made me dream. And I'm just so honored to be here with you tonight. So at the end of the dinner, I dropped off at Laser Wolf. You get soft serve at the end of the night. We have a different soft serve every couple of weeks. And I dropped it in the center of the table. And she had told me that the fries there were the best fries she'd ever had. And so I go, and just if you want to dip them, here's some fries as a vehicle. So I kept walking. I cleared a couple tables. And when I was walking back, she grabbed me by the arm and she leaned in and she goes, Kevin, this time it's me that's moaning. And I was like, that's it.
That is that. Hey, that's close to the Jessica Lange moment. I mean,
I was like, I can retire now.
Oh my gosh.
That's it.
Oh my gosh.
So it wasn't my dish, but a dish that I served. And that moment was the most fun I'd had working in a dining room in a long, long time.
Can I tell you, we've done over 100 of these shows, and your ultimate dish will be remembered as a night of service, and it's a perfect answer, an absolutely perfect answer. And I think, Kevin, we are coming in right under the wire so that we're not going to delay you. Kevin, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Ultimate Dish Podcast, brought to you by Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. Visit escoffier.edu/podcast to find any materials mentioned during the podcast, including notes, links, and other resources. And if you can, please leave us a rating on Apple or Spotify and subscribe to support our show. This helps us reach more aspiring individuals ready to take the next step toward their dream careers. Thanks for listening.